how long does it take to do that? Years, sometimes decades for God to bring about the vision that he's birthed in you.
Yes.
And yet when we hear a word, we're like, why hasn't it happened here?
Right.
Yep.
Let's be a week.
Yes.
Right.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Between the Lanes, and we are beginning season 2. Now, this may be the first time you've tuned into our episode. So, yes, we're in season 2. You need to go back and listen to all of season 1. Maybe you've watched or listened to all of season 1. Welcome to season 2. We're so glad that you're here in the conversation that Dad and I have between the lanes. And Dad, we're on season 2. How do you feel about that?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Season 1 is over. We tried through season 1 to challenge and inspire people at every expression of their leadership, to let them know that if you're in business and you're a leader, you can take your faith into your marketplace experience and really do something great for God and his kingdom. At home, you can raise your leadership to a new level and influence your family. And of course, if you're a faith-based leader and working in vocational ministry, we want to help you learn in every genre of leadership how to implement your vision without losing your life.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to just hear from you. So let us know if there's topics you want to talk about, things that we can address in your leadership. We've done that through several episodes. I love getting feedback from young leaders that are out there starting their career, wanting to know topics to talk about. We've got seasoned leaders who are going, here's some things that I'm dealing with. Whatever that is, let us know.
Yep.
And I will say for today's episode, I'm excited because I think it's a good way to even launch into season 2. We're going international.
That's awesome.
We're going international. Now, we haven't actually gone international, but we have an international guest. And
but our international guest is from a place that you lived for 2 years, and I visited.
Hey, we're going to get to that. We're going to get that. Don't steal my thunder.
Okay.
Don't steal my thunder.
Okay.
I want to welcome Chris Heaslip as our guest today. Chris, welcome to you. Go ahead, start talking so people kind of guess where you're from.
It's an honor to be with you guys.
Oh, look at that. Something like that.
I mean, honestly, you guys are two of the highest character leaders that I have ever had the privilege of meeting and working with. And Todd, even just, being friends with you over the last 2 years and seeing how you dealt with transition, and seeing the character you displayed in that season. I mean, my respect for you went to another level. So,
Chris, thank you. That's
awesome.
That means the world. Thank you. Well, I share in admiration, and you were a key friend in that transition. And just thank you for being that, for being a person to be able to talk with and your guidance. So thank you very much. So if you couldn't tell by his accent, Chris is from New Zealand. Way south. We could say South Texas, but it's a little farther south than
maybe just a little.
It's about as far south as you're going to go, unless you're at Antarctica. But and yes, I do have a personal attachment. Glenn and I lived in New Zealand for a couple of years. Didn't know Chris at the time, but hearts knitted together once found out that we share common folks that we know. Pastor Paul DeYoung at Life Church down in New Zealand, Auckland, and others. So it's an honor to have you with us today, and thank you for all that you said. You have so many different ways. Of course, I can introduce you as the executive chairman of Leader. You are the co-founder of PushPay.
Mm-hmm.
How many other businesses have you started?
Over 20.
Over 20.
Yeah.
So you're a serial starter.
A serial loser. Something like that. Yeah. PushPay was actually the 15th startup that I tried. So before PushPay, I had started 14 different companies. All of them failed. And PushPay was number 15 that ended up becoming successful.
And very successful. If people don't know, I know you're not with PushPay anymore. You end up selling it, but talk about even how that development, what it did, and what it is.
So I trained in university as an accountant and thought that's what I would be doing. And kind of long story short, I met Elliot, my co-founder, and he had this idea for this payments company. But if we just back up a little bit, I had thought, I was trying to start these companies. I thought that's what God wanted me to do. And I had 14 failures under my belt, and I was frustrated with God one day, and I was complaining and praying and kind of really upset about it because I thought I was doing all the right things. And I was reading through my Bible and I came across this verse in Proverbs 23, and it says, "Do not wear yourself out to get rich. For if you chase after money, it will grow wings and fly away like an eagle towards heaven." And I was like, first of all, I was like, that was me. I was literally working, myself to the bone, 16 hours a day, trying to, make these companies, make it happen. And I started praying. I was like, God, what does this mean? And God said, Chris, you started 14 companies because you wanted to get something. But that's not how it works in my economy. How it works in my economy is start a company that's focused on giving and helping people, and success should be the byproduct of that organization, not the reason for doing it.
Wow.
And so it was literally a month after that I met Elliot, and he literally had a giving company. And I was just like, this is a sign. This is
clear sign.
And so we started that together. And 3 years, it was just a slog every single day trying to get it working. We were not engineers and programmers and had no experience in payments. And the company went public in New Zealand in 2014, and that's when we moved to the States. And from 2014 to 2019, when I finished, the company grew from about $1 million to over $100 million of revenue, from 20 staff to over 400 staff in that kind of short period of time. And so it was a roller coaster journey after having failed so many times. To kind of be on the roller coaster was ride.
It's amazing that we're sitting here talking and that you didn't, get really offended at me, because I think I was maybe one of the first customers that Elliot called on in the States.
Yep.
When I was at Gateway and he came and was like, hey, set up a meeting and was talking about PushPay. And it was great. Loved, of course, the New Zealand connection made with him and right away, but it was a startup, and we were a church that was, we already had our payment stuff going, and he cast a big vision. We want to see $1 billion come through, through the organization for the kingdom and And I was like, that's amazing. But what are you doing now? I was like, well, we're starting. I'm like, come back and see us in about 5 years. I love your vision, but I don't know that we can start. And I mean, loved him. I thought, man, this is going to be amazing. And sure enough, 5 years later, oh yeah, you guys had rocked it. And, probably the majority of churches, maybe around the world, I don't know, certainly in America, have converted over to PushPay. And anyway, just an amazing success story. But I want to unpack, to whatever degree you want to talk about all 14 of these failures. Sure. But what I think is amazing, and I think all of us need to be encouraged by, is, do you quit at the 13th one? Do you quit at the 14th one? And it was the 15th one that took off. And man, the moments of discouragement, and then, I mean, obviously the 15th one takes off, it scales at a level that, of course, you hadn't seen. All the ways, how did you grow with that? How did you do that? How did you manage your family? How did you, those dynamics? So,
okay, I got a question to add on to that. Yeah. In these failures, did you have a parachute that you pulled the ripcord and just kind of floated back down? Or did you burrow in headlong into the failure of the company and go, well, that doesn't work?
Yeah, that sure hurts.
Yeah. A little of both. And so there was some in the range of different industries. There was some in packaging. We had think of a Powerade bottle that was shaped in a football. And so the idea was that you could throw this thing around. And so, I had a business partner that we did that with, and spent 9 months and tens of thousands of dollars creating this thing. And people loved it. But the problem was, when it got into manufacturing, they move along this conveyor belt, and the sides of the bottles kind of push them forwards. And I didn't know this, but they manufacture hundreds of bottles every minute. Like, these things are high velocity going through. Yeah. So when you get these balls that are shaped like a football, this narrow piece in the middle that's curved, they kind of move backwards and forwards like this. And so they would fall over, meaning they'd shut the whole plant down and have to stand them up. And so the problem was that it just couldn't be manufactured in the way that they did this. And so you see, you don't know that until you kind of get into the process.
Right.
And it seems like a good idea, but along the way you find out there's these reasons why something doesn't work that you didn't think about.
Yeah.
We had another one, which was a company that, imagine that you could have a World Vision branded credit card. And when you went to the store, you would swipe that and people would see that and say, what is that? And you say, well, this is a credit card that when I use it and I spend money, 1% of the money I spend goes to a charity of my choice. if I spend $3,000 a month, that's $30.
Right.
And, that would sponsor a child that would be alive just by the act of choosing this credit card over that credit card.
Yeah.
So we, thought about this, and we went to the banks, and Visa and MasterCard loved it. They were like, this is great. Corporate social responsibility was the thing back then. And long story short, the banks didn't want to promote it because they had this theory that when someone gets to the checkout at the grocery store, they look and they go, well, I could get, 30 miles on my Delta card, or I could give to sponsor a child. And they said, we don't believe that people would actually choose to use this charity kind of branded card.
Wow.
And so there was all of these different failures in these different ways. But see, if you look at it from a very myopic view, you see, well, I had these 2 startups that failed and they cost a lot of time, energy, and money. But when I got to run PushPay, well, first of all, I had this whole background in the credit card industry and understanding Visa and MasterCard and these kinds of things that I'd spent a year of my life doing. And I had spent a year of my life trying to figure out this packaging company and learning trademarks and intellectual property and all of these things. And well, that's software. And so these things that seem like they were wasted, God used and redeemed to actually help propel the next thing forward.
Yeah.
And I think when we think about failure as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a parent, we see these things as just so narrow that I failed at this thing and it didn't work, but we don't see the seeds out of the failure that actually are going to create the conditions for success.
Yeah.
And that is when I talk to entrepreneurs, I say, I forget who it was. It might have been Jeff Bezos. He said, if you want to double your success rate, you should double your failure rate.
Wow.
And as leaders, we're so caught up in our own position of authority. And, if I try something and it fails, well, then the people around me will see that I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And we internalize that instead of saying, actually, I'm a leader and I'm here for a greater purpose.
Yep.
And so I want to take this on, and I'm not going to bat it. If you as a leader are batting 80% or 60%, you're an all-time great.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
That's right.
But what? So you've got to try more things that have a chance of being a 10x return.
Yeah.
But if they fail, you've only lost 1x.
Right.
In terms of the investment. And so we don't think like that. We think if I fail, then it's going to be bad. And especially in the church space, one of the biggest challenges I've seen is that because they're funded by donations, we feel like we have to be good stewards of the money that we've been given because people are working really hard to give their tithe to the church.
Yeah.
But then what happens is we say, well, we don't want to take risks with that.
Right.
Because it's someone's hard-earned money and I can't waste the money.
Yeah, or I don't want to potentially lose it or what,
Exactly right. But, the parable of the talents, that's what we're doing as leaders is we're saying, I'm just going to bury this over here.
Yeah.
And instead of taking risks and trying things and trying to be on the cutting edge of culture, we just want to always follow along behind 3, 4, 5 years.
Yep.
But what happens then is we lose the ability to influence culture because we're just following what everyone else is doing and what the world is doing because we've ceded our ability to the world to control what's on television and media and things like that because we're not willing to take a risk and try things that might not work.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, and the reality of as people work through that dynamic of what has God given me, he hasn't given everyone the same. He parses out talents differently. And so a person with 2 talents might look at the 5 talent and go, well, I don't have 5 talents. What am I going to do with my 2? And so you get in this comparison way as opposed to God just going, but what I gave you, I want to see you steward it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of stewardship, when I think of stewardship, a lot of times I think of it almost more so meaning management. How do you steward properly? But I think really stewardship is what do I do to activate my faith with what God has given me? And when I don't activate my faith, I'm storing up something that will end up rotting. I mean, Jesus called him, you're a wicked and lazy servant. What you did by storing up and not making a return.
By burying it.
You are wicked and lazy. And so that's such it's convicting to every believer. Everyone understands the idea, whether it's sowing and reaping or stewarding with the parable of the talents, that idea, what am I doing with what God has given me? And to somehow disassociate faith with the risk that's necessary. Now, I think a lot of times maybe where people struggle is, there's examples where somebody stepped out in a way that maybe God wasn't calling them to do, or well, so that you follow that one down, and it's like, okay, well, that God didn't bless it because you stepped out in a way God wasn't calling you to do. But let's just say God is motivating you to go, and you don't go. Well, now you've disobeyed. You didn't go. You stored up, or you go, and then suddenly there's a failure, and you go, well, did I miss God?
Exactly.
And suddenly they stop. But what happened? What was happening is, God, we pray, God, would you train me to be able to do this? God, and so He goes, well, yeah, I want to train you. I want to equip you through that failure.
I think that's spot on. One of the things is I believe that almost all conflict comes down to either values misalignment or timeframes misalignment. And so, when you say that, we say, wow, did I miss God? But sometimes the failure here, is actually, if you look at it on a longer time frame, you see that this actually results in something over here.
Yes.
And so I love the idea of faith, and you guys are just way more qualified to talk about that from a spiritual sense. But as a business person, I read my Bible and it says faith is the substance of things hoped for. And yet as people in the marketplace, what is faith that has a substance?
Substance, yeah.
And so I say, well, just imagine that, and I just know this because as a entrepreneur trying to start things, let's imagine I say to you, Todd, I'm going to go over there in that field and I'm going to build a house. You say, you're crazy. You don't own the field. You've never done that before. You don't have any plans. Like you're not qualified.
Yeah.
And I say to you, okay, and then I come back a week later and I say, I've bought the field, and then I come back, but after that I say, I've developed some plans and you can see this. And then you come back and I walk you around and I say, here's the front door, and we pretend to open it. And, we walk around and I tell you the room is going to be here and here. And then we come back another week later and, there's foundations poured and so on until, 3 years later, there's a house here. Yeah. So here's the question. If we understand that faith is the substance of things hoped for, at what part was the house built? Was the house built when you can walk into this thing that's finished? Or was the house built when I said to you, Todd, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to build this house? And what we do as Christians often is we don't have a long enough time horizon, because how long does it take to do that? Right, years, sometimes decades for God to bring about the vision that He's birthed in you.
Yes.
And yet when we hear a word, we're like, why hasn't it happened here?
Right.
Yep.
Let's be a week.
Yes.
Right. I can't even go buy the land or draw some drawings on a piece of paper.
Yep.
But see, I think that when we say faith is the substance, I can show you some plans and show you on a piece of paper, there's substance to this thing that I hope for.
Yes.
And so I think faith is not just hopelessly wishing for something.
Yeah.
And it's not saying, well, God, you didn't do this in a week or two, and therefore I'm really angry with you. Yeah. Faith is like, another word the Bible uses is, it says faith is like a mustard seed. Well, this is the smallest possible seed that you can get, and yet it turns into the biggest tree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this idea that faith is just this hoping for things.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's action that has to come behind that to actually plant that in the ground and care for that and be a good steward that leads to this outcome that happens over a period of time.
Oh, that's so
Okay.
good.
So Chris, I got to come back to this 14 times failure. Would you say that you're a man of courage, or did you not ever worry about failing? I mean, about the third or fourth time I'd be going, I stink at this. I can't do this. But you kept rolling up your sleeves and going for the next one. And it's like the challenge didn't phase you. You weren't fearful of losing. How did that develop?
And can I insert an additional part of that question? Where in this journey were you in your faith? And if you were a believer at that time, like, where was God, or how was God speaking to you during those failures?
Yeah. I mean, I got saved at a young age. I would say I was a Christian, but I really got discipled by someone in a youth group. And so his name was Matt. And when I first started going to the youth group, I remember he would just say, hey, let's just hang out. I didn't have a father. I grew up, my mother was a single mother. She raised me. She worked 3 jobs. She was working all the time. She was an incredible godly woman, but she realized I had no godly men around me. And so we started attending this very charismatic church, and the youth group there had a young guy named Matt Berry, and he just started hanging out with me. In the beginning, it was not even talking about any of that stuff. he didn't kind of lead with, are you reading your Bible or anything? He just started saying, hey, let's just hang out. And over time, he started saying, hey, like, here's just a couple of verses, read these, and then come back and like, let's discuss those. And that started developing over 3 or 4 years to the point where, you know, he was asking all these very vulnerable questions about where you were as a teenager and how things were going. And that 3 to 4 year period with Matt Berry literally changed my life.
Wow.
Because he invested into me. He didn't want anything from me.
Yeah.
He just said, hey, let's learn the Bible together and what it means to be a man who follows God's heart. And, you know, I think that people who invest in those teenagers or in college, like that window from 12 to 25 is the period where people are most likely to give their lives to God. And after that, you know, it's very hard to get people saved.
Yes. Well, and just real quick on that, because I'm thinking, man, even that comparison of like, so 4 years of discipleship, very slow, very, hey, read this. You know, people think about discipleship, very methodical. And working through a very systematic approach, which was very relational, a lot of planting, and probably in the day in, day out of it didn't seem very, it's like, oh, okay, go read this and we talk, and didn't seem like revolutionary in your life, but over 4 years, you've been transformed.
Correct.
And I'm even tying that to the idea of starting a business or watching things go and how it grows and what that takes. But you almost got that picture in your life through how you were discipled by Matt Berry.
Exactly. And I think in the church, we like to think about how many people do we get saved, but no one wants to talk about how many people do we disciple over 4 years of time.
Exactly.
Because it's slow and you see no value in that. And this is tying it directly back to business. One of the things I tell my teams is, you know, I don't care about the results. I mean, we want to see the results, but I care more about who are you becoming than what are we getting. And this is what I tell them time after time after time. You can control the work ethic, you can control the attitude, you can control the learning and the books you read, but you can't always control the end result.
Wow.
And so if you're becoming a person of value, there's really only two things. And this goes directly to the question about startups. You know, I tell them we either win or we learn, right?
I love that.
So if we failed, we learn something.
Yeah.
And so the question is just how many times can you learn before you win?
Yeah.
Because if you never give up, you will win.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
So when it was failure 5 and 7 and 10, it wasn't I'm failing. It was, man, I've learned so much.
I'm the most learned man in all of New Zealand.
That's literally that's how my mindset was. And so it didn't feel like I'm the biggest failure. It felt like I've learned so much about all these different parts of business, and this is going to help me. And I think the other part of that was I didn't have a father around. I didn't have a business mentor. So I just read a lot of books, and I can go through 5 books that like changed my life. But, you know, the purpose-driven life, you know, understanding like, what has God called you to? Like, I never had a doubt that God had called me to business in some way, shape or form. I just never found out what it was yet.
Yeah.
And so there was never a doubt that something was going to happen. But it was just, I don't know how and when it's going to happen. And so you just keep getting up and going again. And I think sometimes the smartest people are the first people to give up. And I remember reading in Fortune, this is decades ago, when people have college degrees, they're 80% less likely to succeed as entrepreneurs because they have options. And when you have options, you're more likely to quit when it gets hard.
Wow.
And so if you're doing a startup as an example, and you get 2 or 3 years into it and you're not seeing the results, you're like, I could go down the road and get a job for 150 grand.
Right.
Why am I doing this for? I'm out of here. You know? But that mindset of just almost being so stubbornness seems like a bad thing. Persistent.
There you go.
Being so persistent and just getting up and going again, and knowing that if you do that enough, you'll win the game.
That's so good. And it takes away the fear. It's like, failure is not the issue. Learning is the issue. And if I've learned, I haven't failed.
I think the biggest thing with that is when you fail, it means people think that they become a failure. And I think the identity, and we talked about this when Todd was transitioning, you know, I thought for years, I'm not Chris the CEO. But yet the day after I left the company, I realized I'm Chris the CEO. Like, a lot of my identity was tied up in my job title. And that's hard. I never bothered me. Failing 14 times, I was not Chris the failure. But when I had a company and it was successful and I was stepping out of that, I'm no longer Chris the CEO. I don't have 400 people, who laugh at your jokes anymore. And I said that to Todd. That's the hardest part. The day after you hand in your SWAT security card and your name badge, you walk out of that building. You're no longer Todd, the executive pastor anymore. You're just Todd.
Yeah.
Now your family doesn't care.
Yeah.
But all the people around you, they know you as this person with this position, and that's really hard. And so I think, especially in America, people here have really this idea of status. They want titles, and people judge you by the car you drive and who your friends are. To say, I work at this startup and this startup failed. It's not almost what you think about yourself. It's what the people around you think. They thought, you did that business and that failed.
Well, so much of that it really forces people to consider how prideful they are. When we think about failing, what's ultimately hurts in the failure is pride. And so if you can overcome pride and realize, I get back up, I start over, I do the next thing. Now if pride isn't an issue, then failure is an issue. I can keep working and moving forward, because the issue is not that I'm so focused on myself and what others think about me. I'm focused on, what is God doing? What does he have next for me?
Yes.
And I move past the issue of pride.
100% right.
I had to sit there for a second, right? Just let it
marinate a minute. But actually what I was thinking was, so when he was in New Zealand, the first time I go to visit him, he's driving a Beamer. And I think, dang, he's arrived. He's made it. He's driving a Beamer. So the next time I come visit, he says, Dad, I got a second car. Got a car for you. And I thought, man, his first car's a Beamer. I wonder what this is going to be. They called it Kropke.
I can't believe you're telling the story. Where are you going with the story?
And I, the dad, got to drive Kropke while he drives the Beamer. It's like, what?
I don't know where he's going with that story. But where that story started is we had some friends come over, and they didn't want to spend money renting a car. So I bought a car for the 2 weeks they were in New Zealand.
Was it a Fiat or what? I
don't even remember what it was, but even how they named the car is a whole other story. But yes, and then when they left, they just left us the car. And so that's why you were driving that car.
It did play a little bit on my ego, though. It's like, oh man, good thing nobody knows me here.
I think that I'm not from here, so like a lot of the U.S. American way of life is kind of foreign to me, and I just almost observe it as an outsider who's new here. But there's such a goal to focus on status, and I think it's incompatible with a biblical worldview, and incompatible with truly being an entrepreneur. Because the second that you care about how things look more than how they actually are, you've set yourself up to fail, because you're focusing on changing people's perceptions of you rather than the reality of what's in your own heart and in your own life.
Wow.
And so people get judged by how close to the stage you sit and who you're friends with and what school your kids go to. And yet none of those things really matter.
Right.
So
it's great input.
So talk about that, because as a person who's you're here in the States, you live here, this is where your life is today, but you still view it as an outsider. Help us as Americans understand, why is that, do you think? And what would you say because I'm thinking as a believer, there's certain things that as I examine the faith journey that's required in obedience to the Lord, and truly, whenever I want to do what God's called me to do and I want to obey him, the faith without some steps of work, we've kind of covered this a little bit, it's just going to be dead. The faith putting his words into action in my life. But somehow, and probably globally it's an issue, but I think in the States, and it goes back to pride, a number of things that I think really restricts people from moving forward. But maybe it's something that as an outsider you view in. Do you see something in the American culture or even in the American church that prevents us from doing this, that as an outsider you can pinpoint what it is?
Well, I think it's working hard is that verse I shared in Proverbs 23. Working hard is not a problem, but working hard to impress all of these other people, that just comes down to really a pride issue.
Right.
And I'll never forget when I first came to the States, people said, oh, where did you work and how did you kind of go through college? And I said, well, I worked at Burger King to pay my way through college, right? And I was a B student. I mean, I wasn't, but I was working almost full-time, workload to be able to make sure I didn't have a student loan at the end of that.
Yeah.
And people's here, their response was, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That must have been so hard. And you couldn't even get a job at Chick-fil-A." Like, you've been to New Zealand, there is no Chick-fil-A.
There's no Chick-fil-A there.
But that was the response, was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, that must have been traumatic for you." I'm like, I was I was putting patties on the broiler. Like, I mean, it's not like, I'm climbing in sewers or something, but the kind of the mindset that to think that someone who's working in fast food is like almost, low
It's
down
below,
on the totem pole.
Uh-huh.
Like, a lot of countries, there is no totem pole.
Exactly.
People who work in restaurants or who work in these roles, sometimes they just do that. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and in New Zealand, you'll notice, like, sometimes people would just work in a cafe, they love it, and then they'll go out surfing at 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
Exactly. It's the most free in life. You're like, you're jealous of them in a way. You're like, man, wow.
Yeah, and you're like, what do they know that I don't?
They figure something out.
But it's a different mindset that people are not always pushing so aggressively to get their kids into this school or to make that extra dollar or to do, they have a different perspective. And that's why I think traveling as a leader is so valuable. And if you get an opportunity to go and see other cultures, you start to realize things are not just like how it is here. You go to Europe and you realize they don't think about the States at all. They're just doing their thing and going around with life, and they drive these little cars, and it's a different way of life than what we understand as Americans.
Absolutely. Well, do you want to stay on? I was going to go to the topic of success.
Well, actually, I was going to move toward leader, but so you.
Okay. Well, let me just connect because I'm thinking, here's all these ways in which you're learning, for these 14 different companies, and then you hit one that hits, and it didn't just hit, but it explodes, and so you, as a leader who've really not had the opportunity to lead a company like that, is suddenly growing. You're trying to keep up. How'd you do that? How'd you scale? How did you personally scale with the company as it was scaling?
It's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, the easy answer is I had great mentors, but I didn't know any great leaders that, I could call and say, please help me with this. And so
we weren't doing this podcast at the time.
Well, I wish podcasts weren't really a thing back then. And so the challenge that I had to myself as a leader was I need to grow 6 to 12 months ahead of the organization. And so if the company is going to be at $10 million of revenue next year or 100 staff, what are the skills and competencies that I need to have as a leader to lead a $10 million organization? Because the thing is, at the point that I'm no longer the right person to lead this organization, I should have the self-awareness to tell that I have these skills and they don't line up with the skills that you need as someone as the board to take the company to the next level. And so my challenge was, what are the skills that I have to learn? And so for the first year of doing PushPay, it was literally, I was learning more about payments so that when I went to meet with Visa and MasterCard, I could tell them and talk about front-end gateways and back-end gateways and payment processing and all of this stuff because I knew it inside and out. And they were like, do you work in a bank? No, I spent the time to learn that competency. And then for the next period of time, it was around software as a service, the metrics. When you're running a subscription or a software company, there's all these metrics that investors want to look at. How do you talk about all these acronyms that people use so that you can be intelligent about that? And then after that, it was learning about leadership. I had 100-something people, and I was like, how do you run a stand-up? What are core values? How do you create those? So I'd find every book I could find to consume that and learn that. And so I think the best leaders are learners, and they come at it from this perspective that I don't know everything that there is to know about this topic, but I'm going to start learning about it so that I can actually have a perspective on it. And I would go to my team and I would feel very unqualified to have an opinion on I didn't think that PushPay was successful until about 6 months before I left. Like, I thought that this business could fail at any time.
Wow.
A little bit of trauma from the previous 40. But I felt like there was always like something in the closet that was going to come out and get you. And so I was like, well, I don't know how to create core values for our organization. So I would find a book or an article and I would give it to them and say, well, this is what Patrick Lencioni says. Like, I don't have an opinion, but here's what he says. So how do we kind of take his perspective and how do we would discuss it and debate it and learn about it? And it was never like, I think this or I have a way. It was, let's figure this out together as a team. And I think that helped, almost being somewhat unsure of yourself and not knowing what you don't know.
But even back to the point of pride on the other side. So, now you're successful. And, pride could have told you, man, you're supposed to show that you know what you're doing. If if you still reflect the heart of a learner while you're supposed to be leading, that could come out on you too. And so now suddenly you're fronting a fake that like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and in reality you don't. As opposed to, I guess there's a balance where you need to project the confidence as a leader that you do know what you're doing, while at the same time you're learning as you're growing. How did you balance that?
Well, here's a great example. I think I would speak to the company. There'd be a few hundred people at that point in time, and I felt like I was a really bad public speaker, like terrible. And I knew I was terrible. No one had to tell me that I was terrible. I just knew. But how do you get better unless you're practicing?
Yeah.
And so what I did was I had my assistant get a copy of the half an hour talk that I gave to the team at the stand-up and send it back to me. And I would force myself to watch that every single week for 30 minutes. And it was bad. Every second word was and and like and this and that. And it was meandering. And I wouldn't have listened to this. I was frustrated by watching it. But you know what? Just that simple act of watching myself back for 30 minutes, I was, okay, change this. And I knew, no one had to coach me. I didn't have, an incredible coach turn up and say, here's what you need to do to make a better talk. I knew instinctively. But how many people have the self-awareness or the humility to say, I want to just sit down and I want to watch back my sermon from Sunday, or I want to watch this back, or ask the people around them for feedback? Because a lot of what needs to change is just the obvious things that are right in front of your face, and yet leaders are blinded to it. Like there's a great book called Leadership and Self-Deception, and the idea as leaders is that we have these incredible blind spots that we don't even see sometimes things as they are. And when we start to face the reality that, oh my goodness, this is really bad, we can then start to focus on that. Like that's step number 1 in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's
Exactly.
like, I'm an addict, like I've got a problem. But from that position of humility, you can move forwards to improve things. And I think so many leaders just, like when I you go to McDonald's and then you get on the scales, you're like, I don't want to look at what the number is. And so you don't get on the scales for 2 weeks. Like that's what most leaders do. They just simply don't want to see what the number says on the scales. And so they just don't want to, I just want to look at it. I don't want to deal with it. I went out and I spent too much money on my credit card. And I just don't want to look at it. Because if I look at it, I've got to face reality. And so as one of the things I drilled into our team is this idea of the Stockdale paradox from Good to Great, which is we face the brutal facts as hard as they might be, but we don't lose faith that we are going to prevail in the end. And people think that by acknowledging the bad that we're going to lose faith. And when we understand this idea that we talked about of what faith really is, we actually free up the people around us to start to surface the things that really are not good. But then we can go to work and start to fix that.
That's great.
And I think if we just start to say, okay, let's figure out what the brutal facts are, then the answers become almost so obvious that it doesn't take an advanced degree in physics to understand how to fix the organization.
Some of what you're saying that I totally agree with is if a person will step on the scale, will they do anything about it once they find out the information? Sometimes you get feedback and it's like, shut up. I didn't like what you just told me, and you don't know what you're talking about. We deny the facts, and then we don't learn out of the experience.
That's right. And I think that's where, having, we did something called the T3B3, at Leader, which is, I would just send a very simple survey to the people that I work with, and I'd say, what are my top 3 skills or attributes, and what are my bottom 3? And I'll give you a great example of that at PushPay. I'd started doing this in 2017, and I sent it out to people, and the number one thing that came back was, you're a micromanager. And I was like, I am the most hands-off, not in the details leader you can imagine. I do not understand how this is the number one bottom skill that people are surfacing. And I had to kind of ask the chairman to come and actually talk to my direct reports to kind of understand what is it that they were saying. And he said, Chris, you kind of say to people, let's agree on we're going from point A to point B, but then you kind of check in too frequently with them, and that's why they feel micromanaged. And it never crossed my mind.
Didn't occur to you that action spoke to micromanagement.
That they felt like there was a lack of trust.
Yeah.
Because I was asking them, where are we at? Where are we at? Where are we at? And their feeling was, Chris doesn't trust me.
Yeah.
And I was like blown away by that.
Wow.
And so the ability to actually have people around you share that information, and then I didn't even feel comfortable going to my direct reports because I thought, well, they might not tell me the truth.
Right.
So I'm going to have the chairman come and talk to them, because they're going to tell him everything they need to know. And then he can filter that. Someone who loves me, has my best intentions at heart, and he can explain it to me in a way that I will receive it. That's one way, you know.
So unpack that a little bit more. So you get this feedback that you're a micromanager, and then you find out more. How am I? What did you do to change after that?
My first thought was, this must be for someone else. this can't be for me, because that's not who I am. But once I got that, I started to understand, okay, how can we create a structure where I get the information I need without having to check in all the time where they feel like I don't trust them. And so he explained to me, he put on a diagram, autonomy and communication. And so he said, look, if you start here, the more communication goes up, the more autonomy someone feels like they have. And so what I'm really trying to understand when I ask people, like, is this done? Is this done? How are we doing? Are we on track? Are we on track? What I'm really asking is, let me know if something is off track.
Yeah. Yep.
And so he said, set the expectation and the culture with your direct reports that when something's off track, there's an expectation they email you. And so if they don't email you, that means that everything's on track.
Yeah.
And so this idea that as communication increases, the autonomy that you give people increases was like a breakthrough for me, because I'd never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And so that simple rule was a win for me, because I felt like I had the information I need. Everything's on track. Everyone's great. And they felt like they had what they need, which is they got trust and autonomy to go about doing what they're doing without feeling like there was this constant micromanagement culture.
That's good. There's a book called Work Rules by a guy named Laszlo Bach, who was the chief people officer at Google, and a book that really impacted me. But he talks about empowerment in there, and he talks about the keys and roadblocks to empowerment. But one of the things he talks about is, you will, as a leader, a roadblock to you empowering will be a lack of systems. If you don't have systems in place to know how to get you the information you want, the reports you need, blah, 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 you won't empower. And thus, by not empowering, you'll look more like a micromanager because you don't have the systems in place to get you the information you need. So I just think that's spot on. And one of the things, so speak to that point, because I think one of my opinion, I suppose, of one of the key attributes for a leader to be able to scale is their ability to empower. So you're kind of already hitting on this topic. So you made this one incremental move, which was, okay, put the system in place, and now I don't check in as much. That made the people feel, they're more empowered. I'm not micromanaging. What are some other things that you did that speaks to specific empowerment moves that allowed you to grow? Because when I think about empowerment, what I'm looking at is, hey, the authority I leave at a certain level, and that may, you create different levels as the organization grows, and that allows you as the leader to move up, think about bigger picture things, and da-da-da. But a lot of leaders hit their lid because they don't know how to empower, or they're not willing to let something go. How did you make each of those incremental moves when the company went from 1 million to 10 million to 50, now to 100? You had to learn to empower it in new ways.
Yeah, I mean, so many. We could spend a few hours just on that. One of the ones that was most powerful was trying to think about ways to create alignment and use goal setting to kind of trickle down through the organization. And I think as a leader, one of the biggest things we can do is, especially as a senior leader, think about how we're creating a culture and a system where people can understand their role and how it fits into the bigger picture.
Yes.
And so just like a really practical one, every quarter we would have a theme. And every quarter, we do it right now of leader, we do a kickoff. At the beginning of the quarter, here are the goals that we have for the next 12 or 13 weeks. And here is the theme that we have to explain why these goals matter and kind of what we're trying to achieve. And in the very early days, it was like this plane analogy. It was like we're in the waiting room ready to get on the plane. And then it was like now boarding. And now it's like, fasten your seatbelts. Like the plane is taking. That went for like 3 or 4 quarters. But then how do the goals kind of actually, the numerical goals fit with the narrative? And so it's like, in technology, we're going to ship these particular features. Sales is going to achieve these particular goals, and so on. And you can have maybe 3 or 4. That's about it for the whole entire company. And one of the number one things that happen when employees get disillusioned with their workplace is they don't know how to answer the question, did I win today? And that really simple question, when people leave the building, did I win today? And so what we have to do is tie every single person's role into this overarching narrative and goal structure so that when they walk out the building, they know exactly, did I help contribute to one of those 4 things?
Yeah.
And it actually takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And yet as a leader, one of the things people say is, I don't have time for that. We would run weekly stand-ups for our team. And every week we would talk about the, Lencioni's 6 questions from the book, The Advantage. We would talk about, why do we exist? How do we behave? Which is, what are our core values? What's most important right now? How do we succeed? We would talk on one of those every single week. And I would literally, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I would ask people who were staff what our core values were. And if they couldn't name the 5 core values, then I didn't have to, they would be embarrassed in front of 400 people.
Yeah.
And so people say, well, that's a little extreme, but how else do you expect people to embrace your values if you're not making it really meaningful to them?
Or know it's that important. They'll know it's really important when you're asking those kind of questions in front of everybody.
And I bet you only embarrassed them once.
That's right. The next time they learned it, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened was, it actually allowed for more decentralized decision making, meaning that you can push more decisions down the organization because we've done all of this hard work up front of saying, this is how our playbook, this is our values, this is who we are, this is where we're going. And so then the question is like, hey, we want to launch XYZ product, or we're going to open this new campus. And the question was, does it fit with our mission, our values? Does it fit with our strategy on how we're going to succeed and the unique skills that God has given us? Is this aligned to that? And if it does, let's do it. And 90% of the time, they can answer the question, no, this doesn't even align with our values, our mission, our competencies before it even gets to you. And so then as a leader, so that it's an investment though. I know I had a friend, he worked at a startup, and they would have one all hands every quarter. And I'm like, how do you create culture and values and mission if you only meet once every 12 weeks? Like, that's crazy to me.
Exactly.
And so people just have this idea that they can do this without putting the time and the investment in. And I've never seen that happen.
That's so good. I was thinking about the idea of what it takes to be almost a chief reminding officer, what it takes.
Absolutely.
Constantly talking about, being willing to talk about it, and being okay to start to bore yourself, reminding people so much that these are our values, this is what we do, this is who we are. Going through that's the only way you're going to build a culture.
Yeah, and remembering vision leaks. You got to keep doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to come back and say, so you're currently, your current business that you're leading is called Leader.
Yes.
So tell us about Leader and talk to us about how that kind of came about in the
Sure.
process.
So one of the very unique things at PushPay was everyone who was an executive had never done their role before other than engineering and finance. So the guy leading the credit card processing part of the business had never done that before. And now it was $10 billion a year or some crazy amount is going through that system. And he learned that on the job. The Matt Tressida, the co-founder of Leader, had never done sales before he came to the company. The president of PushPay, he worked at UPS before. And so we really, people hear this, but when they think about it, it doesn't click in their mind that if you hire for culture, you can teach people the competence. But the question is how? How do you do that? And so I think at PushPay, what happened was we put the support around them and the structure to help people learn these different roles. And so the real kind of heart for Leader was, how do you create software that helps people do the stuff that's really important? So for a frontline manager, having a one-to-one and coaching their staff, creating a performance development plan. We're talking before about, it's really important that people kind of say, well, you're here and you want to grow in public speaking.
Yeah.
We create a plan and we say, here's opportunities and books and how do we help empower staff to do that? We just did a partnership with the Table Group and Pat Lencioni, and how do you put the mission and the vision right in front of people? As they're logging in to do their weekly meetings, they see this is why we exist, for example. And so I don't think there's a way to do that that's singly better than software, because software is right in front of you as you go through your day doing those things.
Right.
So
yeah. Can I go back to a topic that I'm curious to hear your perspective on? Because, goal setting and very clear targets and goals, very important. So comment on the connection between setting goals and building systems. I heard somebody talking about, and I heard this, and so I was then talking to somebody who was talking about just their fitness program and weight loss and and they go, I just need to set some goals. I said, you need to scrap your goals. You need to set up a better system.
Yep.
And once you set up the system, your goals will begin to become clear. But most people, at least in that element, they set their goals, and when they don't hit it, so something fell off track, then they're discouraged, and it's all gone, and they lose any ability, motivation, focus, That may work well. Hey, don't have goals, build systems in a personal one if you're trying to lose weight or get in shape better. Tie that into organizational development, setting goals, building systems.
Yeah.
Marry those two together.
Yeah. So as someone as just take a VP, in the commercial world, title, you own an outcome.
Yeah.
You're going to hit this target or not. You're going to ship a product or you're not. But sometimes that can be a little reductive, because then they say, wow, the market was bad and that's why I missed, or, XYZ staff member resigned and that's why I couldn't ship the feature. And so it becomes very hard as a leader to really kind of get under the hood and see, is someone blowing smoke, or are they really, is there real reasons for why we missed the number?
Yeah.
And so what I prefer to think of it as is kind of leading indicators and, outputs. And so how do we look at the indicators that are going into this? So if I just take sales, for example, sales is how much revenue did we add this month, right? But there's really only 3 or 4 metrics that go into that. How many phone calls did we make if we're a cold calling organization? How many demos did we do? And what's the conversion rate on those demos? And what's the deal size? That's it. There's 4 metrics. But I can tell you like a month or a month and a half into the quarter whether we're going to hit the quarter or not.
Yeah. Because
all I need to do is go look at these 4 numbers.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's better to look at these leading indicators than it is to look at this, because if this is correct, this is going to happen by default.
Yeah.
And so I have a trainer, started going to the gym, and I say to the trainer, listen, your job, the reason I'm paying you is to make me get to the gym. Because if I'm paying you, I will come.
We'll go to,
because I have it on my calendar. I've already paid with the money. That is success.
Yeah.
Whatever we do, I know that I'm going to do all the things I need to do if I get there.
Right.
And so if you can't afford a trainer, just commit yourself to get in your car and drive to the gym.
Yeah.
And when you don't feel like going in, don't go in.
Yeah.
And I bet you 8 times out of 10, you will go to the gym because you're just sitting in the car. You're like, yep. Or another one I heard was if you want to read your Bible, have a deal that you create a streak to read 1 minute a day. The 1 minute Bible reading plan. Because if you open, I don't know about you guys, I get my Bible, I start reading, and I say 1 minute.
Yeah.
And then an hour's gone by. Where did the time go?
Right.
I mean, but it just started with that 1 minute. And so we kind of think well, if I don't read for an hour, and if I have this massive goal, I don't got to lose all this weight. I feel demoralized. I don't know how to achieve it.
Yeah.
And yet it's the leading indicators, these really small, simple things that you can do.
Yeah.
And if you read for a minute and that's all you can do that day, you close it and that's fine.
Yeah.
And if you just simply turn up and if you just walk on a treadmill for 10 minutes, that's success.
Yep.
And so I think as leaders, we just think the goal and the mountain is so big and so lofty. It's no, just plant that little mustard seed in the ground and put a little water on it. Yeah. That's success.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. I don't want to leave without asking this one question, because, I see you as a thought leader. You're a startup guy. You like startups. and you may not even have an answer about this or something you want to declare to the world, but what are the things you're thinking about now? Like what are things that you're seeing, or is there something that is really interesting you today, just as an intriguing thought? I'm just curious to hear what are the things that Chris Heaslip's thinking about.
Have we got another hour, guys? So two things, whatever people define success as, if you have a biblical view of success, it should terrify you. Because if God's given you something, he's going to require something from you. And so I feel some incredible amount of responsibility to use what I've been given to help as many people as possible.
Wow.
Come to know Jesus, and, whether that's feeding people, planting church, whatever that is.
Yep.
But that should be terrifying.
Yeah.
There's a story about John D. Rockefeller, perhaps the richest man to ever live. And he wrote a letter to his accountant, and he said, God has given me all of this money, but the pressure to be a good steward with the money is crushing me.
Wow.
And so I think that you guys have been around some incredible leaders, and you've seen the platform that they have. But what people don't see is the pressure that comes on those people, whether that's a senior pastor of a very large church, someone with a lot of money, someone with a platform and influence.
Yeah.
But the question is, what are you doing with that platform and that influence and that money that's ultimately about serving God?
Yeah.
Because you're going to give an account for that.
That's right.
And that should be terrifying.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so I think that the second part of that answer is, today I think a lot about media as a way to influence culture. And I love what you guys are doing. Like, I think that podcasts as a format to communicate truth and to reach people and impact people's lives is by far and away the number one way to influence people. And I think churches are abdicating that space as a way to engage with people through a conversation, because this format is so different than someone speaking at you from a stage on a Sunday morning. And so, to this idea of using the skills and talents and money that God's given me, we've partnered with some amazing people here, Tyler and Connie Bates, to help launch a product called Amazing Kids, which is, how do we do Sunday school in a better way? Because, like, the number of churches who can do Sunday school at an elite level is maybe 100 in America. But for everyone else, how do we create content that allows the volunteers to focus on serving the kids and training volunteers instead of creating content? Because the chances that your people can make better content than Tyler and Connie is like about zero.
Right.
So why not outsource the content creation part of it, so you can focus people on that? And then outside of that, Tim Ross, and we've had it's been an honor and privilege to partner with him through The Basement and help launch the B-side. And the feedback that people are getting through that is like, it's just mind blowing.
That's
the life change that can happen through a podcast. And so, we have something called Mission Studios, where we partner with incredible people, Rita Springer and John and Lisa Bevere, and we're helping produce all of their podcasts, because I think that media is the way that we're going to reach people for Jesus. And there's people who will listen to a podcast that will never set foot in church. Never.
That's right.
And so how do we reach them? Because they're out there, they're on YouTube, they're looking. How do we stop them watching Mr. Beast and say, I'm going to watch Lisa Bevere instead?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
That's the opportunity that we've been given as the church. So I'm very passionate about media, and I love what you guys are doing. I think this is incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, hopefully somebody comes across us as well and goes, hey, what's Tom Lane saying there? That guy, the silver fox, is saying something. I want to know more.
Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to have you on. Thank you for sharing your insights and all that. I know not even all that God's done in and through you, but getting an insight into it. It's an honor to have you, and thanks for your friendship and your support of us. So, Dad, you want any final comments, or you want to close out with prayer?
Now let's pray. Lord, thank you for our friends and for the impartation of truth we received today. I pray that everyone would be encouraged not to give up, no matter where they are on the journey, but they would continue to be faithful, knowing that if they'll keep working, God will bring them to the place of his desire. So, Lord, we just give you thanks for that. We pray your blessing over every person. Be with us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.